Now we're ready to show how to wash out a screen. We'll put our screen in a light-safe room in the washout sink. If you don't have a washout sink, you can set this up against the side of a garage, the side of a house, or even a laundry room sink, but you do want to make sure it's in a light-safe room, and if you're doing it outside, be sure to do it in the dim light of the dusk or possibly the shade or a well-shaded area that no direct sunlight is hitting. To wash out, simply using low pressure, get the screen wet on both sides. As you get the screen wet, you'll see the image start to develop immediately. Get on one side and turn it over. Get it wet on the other. Now once wet, allow the screen to sit and soak up the water for about a minute. This will allow the emulsion to become loose and very easy to knock out, especially if you have opaque films. If you don't allow your screen to set long enough, it'll be a lot harder to wash out the emulsion. Now keep in mind that emulsion is about 70–80% water. So if you spray it too long with water, the exposed area of the screen will start to rinse out and you'll do what's called blowing out the screen. Basically, you'll ruin your image and have to start all the way over with the exposure process on a brand new frame. So you do want to be careful not to put too much water on the frames. With a proper exposure and a dense enough film, your screen should wash out in literally under 30 seconds. If you're having a very hard time washing the image area out, your film is not dark enough, you're exposing for too long, or you're not washing out in a light safe area. Make sure they're wet on both sides. They should be consistent in color. Once they've been allowed to soak and wet a couple times for at least a minute, now let's go to wash them out. Now we'll show two different methods to wash out. The first is using the garden hose. The second, using a pressure washer. Some people are scared to use a pressure washer to wash it out. I prefer it because it does a faster job, it puts less water on the screen, and you make sure you're knocking out all the detail. With this type of washout, what can happen is you use too much water and the emulsion soaks it up and you blow out your image. If you don't have a good enough exposure, your screen will not be strong enough in order to hold during a pressure washer. So if your screen can't hold it to a pressure washer, there's something else wrong. If you have a good enough exposure, it should be able to hold up to a pressure washer, no problem. Let's first show using the hose. Using a fairly strong spray, we will begin washing out screen number 1. Now what you want to do is you want to start at the top of the frame and work down at least one time. Now as you see, we already start to blow out some of the image area. You don't want to spray one area of the screen too long. You want to spray that area of the screen long enough so that you get all the emulsion that's supposed to wash out of the image area. I typically wash out facing the shirt side of the screen or the flat side of the screen. I don't like washing out on the inside of the screen because I feel like I'm pushing against the emulsion. However, if you have a good enough exposure time, you definitely don't need to worry about it. You can wash out from either side. But to be on the safe side, as you're starting out, typically wash out from the flat side of the screen. Once our image area is washed out, we'll then wash our registration marks out. in mind this screen was exposed using the 500 watt halogen light, which can't pick up a lot of detail. As we'll show the screen later once it's dry, you'll see that the block area of the image washed out fine, but the fine detail in the registration marks or the small fonts didn't really come out. This screen's now washed out and ready to dry. The first step of drying process is to ensure that you wipe off all the water out of the inside and the outside of the screen. You do that by using a dry newspaper. You don't scrub or agitate the frame. Simply put the newspaper on the inside and then outside of the frame, soaking up all the water. This is important, especially if your screen is underexposed. If your screen is underexposed, you'll see a lot of pink residue on the frame. On this frame, we actually see some pink residue. It's not underexposed that bad, but it is a little bit underexposed. That's actually the diazo dripping off. If we don't dry the screen first, what can happen is the diazo can actually drip down into your image area and block out your image, which is not good. That means you'll have to respray your screen out and try to open that image area back up, which is pretty difficult. Now that the screen is dry, we can either dry it in front of a fan or even out in the sun. If it's a one-color image, drying it in the sun works great because that sun both post-hardens the screen by putting more UV light into the screen to harden it up even more than it already is, and it dries it extremely fast. If it's cold outside, just use a fan and blow it directly against the screen. Next, we'll show a washout using a pressure washer. When you're picking out a pressure washer, you probably need to pick out one that's not super powerful, probably 1500 psi or below. If you're using one that's more psi than that, you might want to turn it down a little bit. You also want to ensure that you have a flat spray and not a pointed spray when you're washing out your screens. To start washing out the screen, start away from the screen and then work yourself into the screen. This is when having a backlit unit becomes very handy. Come to the side, turn on the backlights. In this way, we'll be able to see through the screen to see what we're doing. Start away from the screen and you work your way into the screen. Watch how much faster this pressure washer works than the standard garden hose. Just like that, our screen's washed out. Now let's wash out our registration marks. Once our registration marks are washed out and our screen's washed out, I'm just going to hold it up to the light and ensure that I got all the emulsion out of the exposed area. Have anything that's left there? I'll quickly run the pressure washer over it again. Now we'll dry it out with the newspaper. Our screen is now exposed and washed out. We'll let it dry and then we'll set it up for printing.